Stop making crappy dashboards. In this video, you'll learn 3 ideas to improve your dashboards today, even if your existing ones are confusing or cluttered. The second idea is my favorite from over 10 years of helping organizations get more insights out of their data. Let's get started. Number 1, think about designing question-driven dashboards instead of metric-driven dashboards. Let me show you an example. A metric-driven dashboard is typically built on a handful of metrics, or KPIs if you want to use that word. It may be things like signups, logins, let's say monthly recurring revenue if you're some kind of subscription business. Maybe there's annual recurring revenue. There might be churn as a percentage, how many subscribers you're losing every given month or week or something. And then perhaps a trial to paid conversion rate. And then, of course, you can have 5, 10, 15 other metrics here. The problem with metric-driven dashboards is that you can really visualize anything these days. You can actually create metrics for nearly anything possible. You want to see how fast a website loads, or how long it takes a user to go from this page to that page, or how many clicks do they have to do before they take a certain action. Whatever you want, you can create a metric around it. And thus, it's very easy to end up being overwhelmed with 10, 15, 20 metrics that actually don't mean much. They might be intriguing, they might be interesting to watch, kind of like, tidbits like, oh, look, our signups went up, or look, here's what a monthly recurring revenue is doing, or something else. But does it really help you tackle whatever is the most important challenge at this point in time? So there can be a disconnect between metrics and what you're actually working on. The solution is instead to actually work with questions and think about designing this question-driven dashboard. In the previous example, this would mean that we would list out all the questions that we care about at this given time. So it might be things like, what marketing campaigns are driving the most signups? What is the rate of growth? How many subscribers are we losing every month, and how is that changing over time? How good are we at converting trials to subscribers? How do we increase long-term retention? Now, you'll notice that some of these questions overlap with metrics. That's okay, right? The question of how good are we at converting trials to subscribers is, of course, a trial to paid conversion rate. That's okay. But by tackling as a question, you're much more likely to end up looking at the things that are actually relevant right now. You may be focused on acquisition, for example. So you can have lots of questions around acquisition, the channels, the conversion rates, the time it takes to go from one step to another. That's okay. And maybe questions around retention and engagement or something else may take a backseat for now. So your questions will initially be focused on that. So instead of thinking, what could we visualize? Which the answer is whatever you want. Instead, we're thinking, what questions are important to us right now? What are those 5, 10, maybe 15 questions? And then let's create charts around them. And some of these charts, of course, may be metrics, very standard metrics. It may be the monthly recurring revenue metric with a change over time. That's fine. But we know it's answering a specific question, and it wasn't just created simply because we have the ability to create it. Idea number 2, think about frictionless consumption. Now, when you create a dashboard these days, it's typically some kind of website, a web page of sorts. The website and web page may be mobile friendly, but it's, let's say, a website of sorts. You can think of like Data Studio, Tableau, Power BI. They're all kind of creative websites of different kinds with unique links you can share. But the key with dashboards, again, is not the ability to create them. There's lots of ways of doing that, lots of things we can visualize as we saw in idea 1. The key is, how do you make consumption easier? And to make consumption easier, we have to remove all the friction possible. Now, you may think from your perspective, hey, opening a website link is actually not that bad. It takes a few seconds, but there can be lots of other ways to actually reduce friction depending on where the person actually engages on a regular basis. So let's imagine that we have a website, and one of the first ways to consume this dashboard, perhaps the most common way, is to simply create a bookmark. So I'll have a dashboard here. This is actually just a demo dashboard in a tool called Mixpanel, but don't worry too much about the tool. This, of course, applies to anything, Tableau, Power BI, any other possible dashboarding solution. Now you tell the user, hey, here's a website link. If you want to access it again, just simply bookmark it. So the user comes in, they click the little bookmark icon, and boom, the bookmark has been added. They can rename it whatever it wants. Now it's a simple thing on their bookmarks menu, and they can access it, right? That's one consumption option. It's not bad. But there's lots of other options. So let's look at a few other ones and how they can actually reduce friction depending on how an individual actually goes about their day, how they actually work. Now here's the second option. You can send the dashboard by email. It could be a weekly email, daily email, or any other kind of frequency. Now, this is a report from a tool called Braze. They send communication emails and push notifications. Don't worry too much about the tool. The point is the format. Now, this email goes out every week, and it contains just a high-level number of metrics. User sessions. Down here, we might have some custom events that we designed for this specific dashboard, some other metrics and so on. Very simple. Now, this specific metrics were chosen for this email. What's great about an email is for some people, they really live inside the email, right? So they start their workday by looking at their phone. Maybe they're on their way to work on a commute. They're going through all the emails. So putting a dashboard in that environment is a fantastic way to get these users to consume it because they're already going through it. It's part of the workflow. It's just another email. And they can now scroll through and see all the metrics and be like, okay, great. Here are the questions. Remember, idea number one that we're thinking about right now. I just saw the latest numbers. I'm ready to go into the office. If you're asking this user now to somehow exit that workflow to be, hey, you're checking emails. Why don't you open a new tab, go to your bookmarks, open your dashboard? This may not seem that complex, but you're now forcing a kind of like a complete different workflow, right? When you already have a workflow, checking emails, you can just slot a dashboard in there. So this is another way to reduce friction, depending on the user itself. A third option could be to send it in some kind of chat tool. For example, if your team uses Slack, Microsoft Teams, there's lots of tools out there that can actually send messages within the tool to a specific channel, a specific user. For example, here's an example actually from AWS. It can send quick forecast report on spending and what they might look like. It kind of looks like this, right? You have some high-level numbers, you have some charts. Typically, these charts actually link somewhere, so you can actually click them and go to some kind of web dashboard. But again, another way of workflow, right? Many people are living in Slack. They're very familiar with it. They're checking it multiple times per day. So you could actually send, let's say, multiple updates every day, and you can be sure they're going to see it instead of, again, having to go to a bookmark, open a web page. So just another way to make data as convenient as possible by putting it exactly where users are at this moment in time. The fourth way you can reduce friction is just perhaps by having TV dashboards. So if your team works in an office, you can actually think about putting actual TVs, and then as people walk by them when they go to the break room, or they go for lunch, or they go from one meeting to another, they're walking by these TVs. And again, it's just a second to maybe pause, look at the numbers, and then keep going. This is all about reducing friction as much as possible. Does not assume that opening the bookmark, opening the website is the easiest thing in the world. There's actually lots of other ways to display data. It doesn't have to be done in a specific way. In most teams, you actually need multiple options. Not one single option will be the best for everyone. Some people want emails, some people want Slack, some people want the bookmark and the website. Other people just want the TVs, right? So you think about designing your dashboards with the user in mind, and specifically, what is the consumption use case that will make the most sense for that user? Idea number 3, think about adding or answering the WIM question for every report, every dashboard. WDIM simply stands for what does it mean? Whenever you have a metric, a chart, a visualization, everyone's always asking, what does this mean? Signups are up. Okay, great. What does that mean? Monthly recurring revenue is down. What does that mean? What do we do? So as much as possible, you're trying to provide context for the individuals who are consuming the dashboards. Sometimes dashboards are given without any context, just literal charts. Maybe the charts have titles, so you can see these are signups, these are logins. This is sort of like the bare minimum. But then every user is forced to figure out the context and say, is this good? Is this bad? Let me kind of go into my own understanding of what's going on in this world to understand it. But you can provide a lot of this context for the user so the decision making is a little easier. So let me show you a few ideas for how you can provide context within dashboards by just making a few simple tweaks to the design itself. First, it's actually helpful to provide literal context in the form of text. So here's a dashboard. We can see we have this section here on churn and retention. We have about 5 charts here of different kinds. Some are numbers, some are trend lines, some have breakdowns. But there's this little section here, and it's giving us some overview of what the section is, right? So it's telling us, here are some of the high-level metrics. Number 1, are we net making or losing money? This is NRR. If NRR is over 100%, we're doing pretty good. Number 2, are we retaining existing revenue, which is GRR? And is GRR over 80%? Then again, we're in a healthy stage. And number 3, how does metrics break down by plan or type or segment? So very simple small context, but we're trying to provide it. And if you can see, of course, that this actually ties to idea number one. The questions in particular that are high importance right now are actually listed here in the dashboard. This is a fantastic practice. But context is given. So if user looks at a number like NRR and sees 96.7, they don't have to assume, is this good, is this bad? They can say, hey, if NRR is over 100, then we're good. It's under 100 right now at 96.7. So we have to kind of think about doing something else, right? GRR, on the other hand, looks pretty healthy, right? It's 88.38. We know that if it's over 80, then it's healthy. Context now kind of helps us understand this. So we can have this little tidbits of text throughout dashboards. Most dashboard tools allow you to do this, to put it next to a chart, to kind of lay out the text in a way that makes sense. Titles themselves, of course, you could have like NRR and then have quick guidance there. There's lots of ways to be able to add tooltips or some other way to tell users, this is what this number means. Here's something, here's a benchmark that says this number is good. Here's a benchmark that says this number is not good, and so forth. In effect, you're providing guidance for how users should think about consuming this specific data point. A second way to be able to answer this WDIM, what does it mean, is to use comparisons. Comparisons, I think, are highly underrated. Many tools actually do this by default, so it's quite easy to actually add them. You think of something like Data Studio, Tableau. The way to compare data is relatively straightforward to set up, and yet it's not always there. So let's look at a very simplified example here. We have this chart that's showing us the number of signups over the last 30 days, as we can see here. Now, this is pretty good, right? There's a nice spike, especially over the last 7 days or so. This seems to be growing. We can actually see that when we highlight, it's actually giving us a comparison from the previous day, which is in itself very helpful. But it would be even more helpful to be able to compare this to other date periods. And again, we have this kind of built in. So we could just show this chart to someone and they'd be like, great, signups are up over the last 30 days. Not bad. But we can then add comparisons of other kind. We can say, for example, what does this number looks like to the previous 30 days? Let's do that. Nice. Okay, so now we're seeing that the previous month was actually quite flat. So this is actually very good. And now you can see that the comparisons here that were initially compared to a previous day, now it's actually compared to a previous period. We get even more context. So this is great. So little things like this start to give us a sense of, okay, this number is good, this number is bad. Here's how it actually compares. Here's the running tally. Here's what we expect. For example, you may have forecasts or projections. You can actually find a way to display those forecasts and projections inside the chart itself. So it's not just, yes, we're seeing this big spike in signups, but actually we had this major marketing campaign this month. We were expecting, 10 times as much signups to see here, and we didn't see that. So all those things start to give further context for what the number is. We can, of course, take this and say, not just the previous month, but what does it look like previous year? Perhaps, we have a highly seasonal business. Imagine you're in Black Friday, you're doing major marketing campaigns and launches, and the numbers seem pretty good, but what does it actually look like to the previous Black Friday campaign last year? Was it good? Was it bad? What about the one before? What about if we take multiple previous years and kind of see an overall trend over time? All those things start to actually put things into context so people don't get confused by numbers and say, this is great, this chart is clearly going up and to the right. That's exactly where we want it to go for this specific chart. The context then allows people to actually make better decisions. The third way to provide more context for charts is to just provide breakdowns. So once again, let's do a quick comparison here. We have this chart here that's showing us MRR. This is monthly recurring revenue. This is a very common metric if you run any kind of subscription business where people are subscribed either on a monthly basis or annual basis. So we're seeing monthly recurring revenue. We can see that over the last 12 months over here, this revenue has been increasing pretty consistently. This is quite nice. This is demo data, so just keep that in mind. But there's a nice increase from, over 12-month periods. Those are pretty good. But again, we're kind of missing context, what's going on. We know that users not only can subscribe, there's other actions users can take. For example, they can upgrade their plans from perhaps monthly to annual. They could downgrade from perhaps a monthly plan to some kind of free plan. They could cancel altogether. So there's actually lots of things that are going on. And if we were to start talking about a larger context, we might say, you know what? This is a nice increase, but we made some major investments in marketing over the last 12 months. We were expecting an increase because we're just spending so much money, but are we actually retaining these users, or are we seeing also some kind of increase in downgrades? Are we seeing increases and cancellations. So we could take this same chart and then break it apart by those different events. So we'll look something like this. This is the same chart, but now we're saying, the top color is the new subscribers, but now we have upgrades down here, we have downgrades down here, and then we have churn. Now, at a glance, we can start to make some assumptions. We can say, you know what? There's obviously a clear increase in the number of new subscribers. We're also seeing some pretty good increases in upgrades, so we're doing a good job there. So some of the effort we put in to get users to upgrade from monthly to annual is working well. But we're seeing also increases in downgrade. So what's going on there? Maybe we need to discuss that a little bit more. On the other hand, churn seems to be somewhat stable, right? It seems to have grown a little bit, so perhaps we can also double check that as well. So a very simple change, a breakdown of the data can now start to give us all this kind of insights into what is actually going on in any given number. It gives us the context to be able to have the appropriate conversation about this data point without falling into simplistic takes of, well, monthly recurring revenue is up. That's great. Everyone high five. Let's go home. There's always much more nuance beneath the surface, but we can only get there if we start to break down. There's actually a favorite line called averages lie, but segments don't. And a lot of times teams are really focused on the average. What's the average purchase price? What is the average recurring revenue every month? What is the average cost to acquire a user? But if you break that apart into all kinds of different segments, marketing campaigns, user type, the products they bought, there's lots of different ways. You may start to see some fascinating insights that may be completely different from the way you think about it. I actually like this phrase so much that I named it my newsletter, which is a semi-regular sending of insights. Check that out, link in the description. It's called Averages Lie. So I think as much as possible, we really want to move away from averages. There's a sense of needing averages to have basic conversations. But when we're discussing data and we are actually talking about strategy and what to do next, we have to move away from averages and be able to break down things and start to look at numbers in a much more nuanced perspective to understand what is going on. And that is all I have. As always, we cover 3 ways to improve your dashboards today. Number 1, move into more of question-driven design. So not about metrics, which is endless, infinite really, but really what are the questions that you're trying to tackle right now? Number 2, think about reducing the friction for consumption. The way you consume dashboards may be completely different from someone else. So you want to think about that friction from a third-party perspective. And there's lots of ways to reduce friction by putting dashboards inside emails or Slack or some other format altogether. And number 3, really focus on trying to answer that WDIM question. What does it mean? And we do that by adding context, whether comparisons, breakdowns, guidance, actual text. So as much as possible, we want to help users who are consuming dashboard understand exactly what they are looking at. As always, my name is Ruben Ugarte. I hope you enjoyed this video. A few things before you go. Number 1, if you're looking for some personalized help with your dashboard in your organization and trying to make those better for everyone else, get in touch. I work with a handful of companies every year. We work on several things, and dashboard is, of course, one of those big things that we tend to work on, and how to make it easier for everyone to consume data, to play with it, to become comfortable with it. So a lot of these ideas, and of course, there's much more that any organization can do to really embrace that data-driven culture. Number 2, if you enjoyed this video, I would love it if you can like, subscribe, and comment. It helps the algorithm, helps me, helps other readers find this video. So perhaps take a few seconds and do that. Number 3, check out the newsletter I mentioned before, Averages Lie. It is a semi-regular newsletter. It goes out every few weeks when I'm inspired and I have something important to share. Every newsletter tends to be pretty short, 5-10 minutes, and it just shares different insights for how organizations can get the most out of their data. Finally, in the comment section below, I would love for you to answer one question. What is your number 1 tip for improving the dashboard? You heard my tips. I would love to hear what you're doing to get your dashboards to a whole different level. So let me know in the comment section below. I'm sure other readers will also want to know as well. As always, we'll talk next week.